Happy Tuesday. We are live on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. So as we go through, feel free to drop your questions or thoughts in the comments, and we might feature them or address them on screen. If you're catching this later and wondering how to catch the show live, I'd say the best way is to go to colememo.com/YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can support the show at colememo.com/support, colememo.com/Patreon. But one of the best ways to support the show is just by smashing that like button, as the YouTubers say. Subscribing or giving the show a favorable rating. So in today's broadcast, we're going to be talking about the potential move to reclassify cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, a decision President Donald Trump recently indicated could be announced soon.
Any other questions, sir? There is reporting that the administration is going to reclassify marijuana. Would that send mixed messages that if marijuana is okay, some drugs are okay, but we're trying to clean up crime? How do they go hand in hand?
We're only looking at that. That's early, but somebody reported it, which is fine. We're looking at it. Some people like it. Some people hate it. Some people hate the whole concept of marijuana because if it does bad for the children, it does bad for people that are older than children. But we're looking at reclassification, and we'll make a determination over the next few weeks. And that determination hopefully will be the right one. It's a very complicated subject, the subject of marijuana. I've heard great things having to do with medical, and I've had bad things having to do with just about everything else. But medical and, for pain and various things, I've heard some pretty good things. But for other things, I've heard some pretty bad things. The other part of your question.
All right. So the reactions to this development have been all over the board. I might throw up on my screen here in just a moment the United States Cannabis Roundtable's response to this development. And I'm just sharing it because I think it's notable to mention that Justin Streckle, former communications coordinator for NORML, I believe that was his position, responded to this post and said, rescheduling literally does not do those things. It merely gives tax reductions to the existing industry. Shout out to Jordan and Justin, who both joined me for a debate. Jordan Davidson from Smart Approaches to Marijuana and Justin Streckle, who I just showed the comment on screen. You can check that out at colememo.com/Sam. So like I say, the reactions have been all over the board. I recently read in Crane's Chicago Business that cannabis stocks surged yesterday. According to the report, some stocks went up 35%, 25%, 20%. And so the reactions have been all over the board. I wanted to get a reaction from a different perspective today. Today's guest has been outspoken in their opposition to both legalization and rescheduling of cannabis. And I've invited them on because I think it's important to hear directly from people with different viewpoints to better understand why they believe what they believe. And in turn, we may help you solidify or rethink your own perspective. Keep your mind open in this episode of
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo is what allows this whole thing to go on.
I mean, you have to respect the memo.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're listening and watching The Cole Memo.
All right, Luke, it's going to be a quick one today. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back. Please introduce yourself for those that may not remember you from the last time you came on.
Yeah, thank you, Cole, for having me on. And the show's getting sleeker and snazzier each time I see it. So keep up the good work, my friend. And you look great, by the way. So yeah, my background, I'm from Colorado. I lived in Colorado most of my life and was, raised since I was a little kid there. So I had the experience of seeing marijuana go from, illegal to medical to recreational. And now I'm a parent. I'm married to a wonderful wife and have 2 little girls. And seeing the impact of legalization around Denver, whether it was secondhand smoke, whether it was seeing people, having mental health crises after using marijuana, et cetera, the impact on people's marriages. So a lot of the family and kid impacts drove me to want to do something on this issue. And so for the last 8 years, I've been the second in command at Smart Approaches to Marijuana, or SAM, the leading organization opposed to legalization. And I've been working with Kevin on all of that good work. And we're based here in Washington, D.C., which is where I just recently moved back to Washington, D.C., actually. So now I'm in D.C. with the rest of the team here.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, cool. So you're all moved in, you're settled?
Yeah, not quite settled, but we're moved in. We're getting there for sure. It feels like it takes a few months for like everything to kind of feel like, okay, we know where that is, everything's
Yeah.
organized, but we're getting there. We're definitely getting there.
Yeah. So before we get into your position, well, I guess this will sort of reveal your position, but what was your read on the question and answer that we just
Yeah,
watched? Did anything stand out to you as notable?
great question. So a few things were notable to me. Obviously, everyone knows my biases are obviously against rescheduling. So different people have different probably takeaways. But I thought it was interesting that so Trump talked about medical marijuana. I think it was about 6 months ago, and it was all positive. He said, I've heard marijuana is great. I've heard it's amazing. It does so many great things. Of that nature. This time he said, and I thought he was going to repeat that refrain, but he said some people like it, a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people hate the whole thing. And I thought it was very interesting to see, there was some emphasis behind the negatives that clearly he's heard. So from an advocacy perspective, it was encouraging to see that the president's hearing the other side of the story on rescheduling. Then the other interesting moment I noticed in that exchange was he said, we're going to make a decision in the next few weeks. And he kind of looked at Pam and she nodded. And I felt like there was some shared understanding there. And so, just even thinking about what happened with the Epstein files, clearly Bondi was able to talk Trump off of releasing the Epstein files. And so clearly there's some respect there, maybe some deference to her call. And we know that Pam fought against medical marijuana. She's not pro marijuana. So I don't know, who knows, but my read on it, and obviously it's based on very flimsy observation, but kind of felt like maybe Pam's walking the president away from rescheduling it. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, just to display the quote you referenced, he said, "I've heard great things having to do with medical, and I've had/heard." I think this is just maybe a typo error or whatever, but I've heard bad things having to do with just about everything else, but medical, and for pain and various things. And I think he continued the statement, but I just thought, like you said, it's notable that he said, "I've heard great things about medical," but then like kind of did a pivot, but everything else.
Yeah, and then he said it's a very complicated decision, and I thought that was interesting because he typically doesn't say things like that. So I think he's feeling the heat, and I think it's also it's interesting because this is a president who in his campaign met with Kim Rivers, the Trulieve CEO, the major marijuana company. He's taken a few $1 million from Trulieve through various campaign accounts. He clearly made a promise, or I don't know if I would call it a promise, but I mean, he took a position in the campaign saying he would reschedule marijuana. So this shouldn't even be a discussion right now. So, based on just common sense. So the fact that he's out there saying this is a complicated decision, there's a lot of people who don't like it, and we're going to make a decision in a few weeks. I think for the industry, they should be very afraid because he already said he was going to do it on the campaign. So the fact that he's not saying, yeah, we're looking at how to do it, he's saying we're deciding if we're going to do it, even though he said in the campaign that he was going to, I think shows he's changed his mind in some way, or at least he's seeing the gravity of the decision.
And I would take it a step further and say that not only does it seem like he's maybe potentially pivoted on that point with medical, saying that it's like a harder decision, but in that Truth Social post that I think you're referencing, where he sort of made his position known and sort of made promises. One of the things he said was that he'd be voting for Amendment 3, and that statement, while we're looking at text versus a press conference, that statement just doesn't feel like they're in alignment anymore,
No way.
So, okay. Well, why do you believe that cannabis should remain a Schedule 1 substance and not be removed to Schedule 3 or any other schedule? I don't know, like if you think it would be better in another schedule, but it sounds like you think it should remain Schedule 1, right?
I think it should remain Schedule 1. And the reason why is because it fits within the precedents and the way that our scheduling system works. So there are a lot of people who say, marijuana shouldn't be on the same schedule as heroin, and Schedule 1's for the really bad drugs, and marijuana is not as bad as some of the others that are Schedule 1, so it should be lower. But that reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the scheduling system. A lot of people think that it is a harm index. So 1 is the worst, 5 is the least bad. But that's actually not what it is. It's based on really two elements, two criteria. One is the potential for abuse. And so marijuana is right alongside other hallucinogens like LSD, in addition to heroin and other substances on Schedule 1, who all have a proven potential for substantial harm that they can inflict on you. So that's one criteria for the scheduling status. And then the second criteria is the medical use, whether there is accepted medical use of the drug. Now, obviously, I know a lot of people think that marijuana is medicinal. What I will say is the plant has not been approved by the FDA for any medical purpose, but the FDA has approved components of the plant for medical purposes. So pure THC in the form of Marinol is FDA approved. That is Schedule 2, I believe, or maybe Schedule 3. Epidiolex, pure CBD, that has been rescheduled. That's a component of marijuana as well. And that is approved by the FDA for medical purposes. So it just, we're not opposed to saying there are components of the marijuana plant that have medical use. As long as it's approved by the FDA, and therefore those should be scheduled down. But we can't just reschedule the entire marijuana plant because, right now you don't smoke your medicine. You don't dab your medicine, right? So we're a science-based organization. We want to see science and research make these decisions and then schedule components as necessary. But the plant itself, the entire marijuana, raw marijuana, should not be rescheduled.
Gotcha. So you're saying that, some of these FDA approved cannabinoid drugs that already exist, you don't necessarily take issue with. And if more came out, perhaps that were approved by the FDA, you wouldn't have an issue with that. It's you're concerned about the botanical plant, like the entire plant itself being rescheduled.
Concerned about, yeah, and it's not even botanical anymore at this point. I mean, there's synthetic versions, there's extracts, they're taking it, they're concentrating it now to make it up to 99% potency, and those are the products that are causing so much harm across the country with youth and adults. And I know your viewers are very well educated on these issues, so they know what I'm talking about. They know it's very potent. They know that there's addiction. They know that there's harm for kids and all those things that are out there. We can agree to disagree on kind of what should be done about that, but I think we all know that this drug has changed, right? And we don't want to see that be rescheduled. And one other thing I'll say is, fentanyl is Schedule 2, and it's not Schedule 2 because it's less harmful than marijuana. It is Schedule 2 because there is accepted medical use for it. One example is for my wife during her delivery, right? They give you a little bit of fentanyl if you're in delivery at the hospital. So it's not because it's less harmful; it's because there's a narrowly accepted medical use for fentanyl. But we don't just reschedule the entire drug or plant or wherever the drug is derived from. We don't reschedule the entire thing because one component of it has medical use. We focus on those specific components, and so. The other piece I'm worried about with rescheduling is that I obviously think that what's really at play here is that it is not about medicine or expanding research. What it actually is about is getting the exemption to the 280E block on being able to write off business expenses for taxes for the marijuana industry. So if they get Schedule 3, they'll write off their taxes. I anticipate it would be in the billions of dollars. That's money that this industry would make if they got Schedule 3. That's why they're pushing for it. That's why True Leave is spending so much money on this, in addition to Verano Holdings and a few other major marijuana brands, which I know Verano's right in your neighborhood, Cole. So, that's why they're pushing this, is because they're going to get money out of it. We have to be very clear. For-profit corporations, they don't do anything for the public good. Their legal responsibility is to return riches and profits to their shareholders. That's fine. And a lot of times that aligns with the public good in many ways. But this is an instance where it doesn't, because for them, they have no incentive to say, yeah, you've been using a lot of marijuana really heavily and it's hurting you. You probably should stop. They have no incentive to do that. They have every incentive to keep selling it. And I think that's the dynamic that I'm very concerned about. And rescheduling would reward and incentivize that behavior by allowing them to write off their taxes, all the advertising, all the product promotion, all this stuff that they're doing to promote these new products.
And I know you get asked this often, but people are asking it in the chat. Alcohol, tobacco, arguably no more harmful, or I'll add harmless. I don't think a lot of advocates like myself will add that. I think cannabis is no more harmful or harmless than alcohol or tobacco. So why should cannabis remain scheduled when alcohol and tobacco are descheduled commodities or substances?
I think that's a very fair argument, because both those substances are killing together, tobacco and alcohol are killing more than 500,000 Americans every year. And the answer is, it's not logical. I mean, the answer is that we are in a situation where our society has made a deal with the devil on those two substances. But what I will say, and when I say deal with the devil, I mean thousands of years of history of smoking, thousands of years of history of drinking alcohol that's ingrained into Western society and culture. And you have 60% of Americans who are using alcohol, 30% who are using tobacco. You just can't get those numbers down enough to make it make sense to prohibit them. I do think, though, if there's a world where 5-10% of Americans are using one of these substances, then maybe it's a different policy conversation. But right now, it's not realistic. And where that compares with marijuana is, yes, half of Americans have tried marijuana, but the number of Americans who are using it regularly is still a very small percentage of the population. We're not talking about the level of cigarette use yet. We're not talking about 30% of Americans using it every single day or even weekly, if you look at the data. So I think that we still have a decision to make as to whether or not we want to see those harms magnified across hundreds of millions of Americans. I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves. And what I'll say is, with alcohol and tobacco, I could see a future, especially with especially with tobacco, where maybe it is banned by the end of my generation, or maybe in the next generation. I mean, we already have countries around the world who are instituting legislation to do generational bans. So when this generation dies out, it'll be illegal to manufacture cigarettes in, I think it's New Zealand. This legislation has been introduced in the UK now. And then with alcohol, there's now huge warnings and a lot of work being done to talk about how alcohol is responsible for a lot of the cancers that we see in society, in addition to a lot of other things. So, I think that society is kind of realizing that drugs have a lot of downstream consequences, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But as it relates to marijuana, I don't think it's logical to say, well, because we have made seemingly nonsensical decisions with these other two harmful drugs, therefore marijuana and every other drug that we would compare should therefore be legal and be out there. I don't think that's the right call, because you're talking about adding more harms and consequences on top of what we've already allowed.
Yeah. I guess just my thought on that is, I have two thoughts. It makes it feel, when you say it that way, it makes it feel like the policy is about tradition. I know you brought up data and stuff, and the rates of use, but it seems like the policy position is more about tradition rather than like just decriminalizing or treating the substances as, like I say, they're no more harmful or harmless. And so like I don't get why the idea that it's been used for a while comes into this, because like cannabis has been widely used in the United States and in other societies, at least in the United States, for over 50 years, but globally for centuries. And I just wonder, and it sounds like you mentioned it, I wonder, like, at what point does it become ingrained enough to reconsider the laws against it?
Well, in my mind, if you get to a place where 60% of Americans are using marijuana on a regular basis, then the idea that you can prohibit it is out the window. If you have a situation where more than 100 million Americans are using it on a regular basis, then you have to alter the policy to then figure out how can you reduce the harms, how can you educate people and do everything we've done with tobacco. But right now, we're not in a situation where 60% of Americans are using it. It still is a much lower number. It's a lot less than half. It's less than cigarettes right now. We're probably in the maybe 10 to 15 to 20% range, depending on the numbers that you would trust for regular users. And I think as long as it's a very small proportion of society, I think we have to decide whether or not we want to normalize it in our culture. And right now, you have these state experiments where we can watch this play out. And the data that we're getting is showing us a lot of the harms, right? There's the association with, there's the higher addiction levels. There's the mental health issue, which I know nobody wants to hear about, but we're now getting enough research to say that we know frequent use of the highly potent marijuana products that are out there, these new products, is associated with very deleterious effects for your mental health, whether it's schizophrenia, psychosis, other such issues. And so, I mean, we as a society get to make that call on if we want to normalize that. I mean, we look at alcohol, we have to deal with the violent behavior that comes from alcohol. We look at cigarettes, we have to deal with the cancer and the death that come with cigarettes. And so far, society said we're going to accept that. I think that's unfortunate.
And like you mentioned, though,
lives, but
to your point, though, I don't think society is accepting that. I think we've got more research. I've heard of more. Now, this might be an anecdote, just because you brought it up too. It sounds like we have a shared anecdote where, like, this data comes out about alcohol potentially being cancerous. Like, I've known more people quitting drinking. I read about it. So stepping away from my anecdote, it seems like the rates of use for alcohol and tobacco are dropping. And it's because of this recognition and through public health campaigns where it's like, look at what happened to people that did that. And I know I've heard you respond to this talking point before. You're like, oh, so we're just going to run an experiment. That's not necessarily what I'm suggesting. But at the same time, it's like, how can you learn and actually tell people facts without allowing the facts to be gathered? You know, I know it's a
Yeah, and
dual-edged sword there.
I
But
think we are gathering the facts, though. I mean, I think we know enough now to know that there's a lot of dangerous things down the road if we say we're going to treat marijuana like tobacco or alcohol and
do you
allow it to be
not
sold everywhere.
do you see it like following a similar trajectory where if people find out that smoking cannabis is unhealthy, like it probably is, the rates are going to drop? You don't think that that will follow like it has with alcohol and tobacco?
I think so far we haven't seen the rates drop enough to bring about real justice. I mean, what I've seen is very unjust. We have a lot of people who have lost their lives from tobacco, for example, from alcohol, and we think that a master settlement with the tobacco industry, it was like that was our way of securing justice for all these people who have lost their lives. But now you can't sue the tobacco industry anymore because of that settlement. So the money's paid, the money's done. The Truth Initiative is funded to do education, and but people are still dying from these products. And in my mind, it's a horrible deal that was made in terms of now future generations still being harmed. Hollywood is still glorifying and glamorizing cigarettes. Yes, more people are educated, but there's still 30% of Americans who are doing it, and there's no sign of it being completely over in sight. And in fact, the tobacco industry has gotten really smart. Now they have these vaping technologies. They've developed whole new classes of ways of ingesting nicotine and tobacco and other additives that are so new that we don't understand exactly how they harm us yet, just like what happened with cigarettes. So, we're going to wait 50 years to find out, oh, all these vaping and smokeless devices, those actually are really bad for you too, and they're causing all these other horrible harms. We're going to find that out in 50 years. So in my mind, the kind of let the drug go out, then start educating people about it doesn't really work because these companies continue to innovate, continue to find ways to deliver their drugs that are still harmful. And I don't think that there's any holy grail coming at the end of this show that's like, oh, we figured out the harmless way to do this and then fully educate people. I think what we've seen is society vacillates, more drug use, less drug use, more drug use, less drug use, depending on the corporations, the innovations that are out there, the technologies. And I just don't think that we should allow any of that to be in the space. I think when you prohibit a drug, it keeps the corporate capture out. It stops the innovation. We would not have Juul today if we weren't allowing companies to get into addictive drug industries. But that is the pure innovation of the American capitalist free market model applying itself to vice drugs. That's what brought about Juul and vaping. Those kinds of inventions were only possible with that kind of an incentive. So I want to keep it out. I don't think that it meshes well with drugs.
Okay, well, we're gonna wrap very soon. Just wanted to ask, first of all, it sounds like this decision's coming in a few weeks. We should get back together in a few weeks and talk about the outcome,
Definitely.
if you'd be up to that. If the decision is to move to Schedule 3 quickly, what do you think is the biggest negative consequence?
Biggest negative consequence is going to be obviously the tax write-off I talked about. The industry will grow substantially in size with that decision. And then the second issue is going to be all the state trigger laws that are in effect. So in Texas, for example, they have a trigger law that if marijuana is reduced in its scheduling, or if it's down scheduled, then that triggers their Department of Health to have to make determinations about medical uses for marijuana. I believe Idaho has trigger laws. I think it's about a dozen other states have trigger laws based on marijuana scheduling status. Then you also have federal implications. For example, DOT, they test only for scheduled substances. So if marijuana is not Schedule 1 anymore, then it won't be, by law, they won't be able to drug test for it for all the various safety sensitive professions that are regulated by the federal government. So there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to need to look out for from a public safety and public health perspective.
Gotcha. Well, again, let's get back together in a few weeks to discuss what happened. Because it sounds like in a few weeks. I don't know. I saw some people on Twitter saying it's going to be in 2 weeks. I don't know. When I hear few, I think 3 or more.
Yeah, I'm thinking 2 to 3. I'm thinking 2 to 3 would be my guess. So. But I think we all got to keep our eyes on Truth Social because I think that's where we're going to find out.
Yeah, I agree. I once saw, I think the folks at the Dales Report, they said you're either going to see it on Truth Social or the folks at SAM are going to break the news. So anyways,
We'll see.
Yeah. Whether you agree or disagree with Luke or myself, I believe that conversations like this are part of how we test our own beliefs against different viewpoints. My goal isn't really to debate so much, but to understand and hopefully give you something to think about as this national discussion on cannabis policy continues. Luke, like I said, looking forward to maybe getting back together with you in a few weeks. As President Trump said, thanks for joining me today. And I'm looking
Cole,
forward
thank you
to
for
our
having
next
me.
conversation. Yep.
It was a real pleasure. You're one of the good guys. God bless.
Yep. Take care, everybody.